Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator news and updates, and today we are going to be talking specifically about SU-15 and some of the really cool features that are going to be coming along, as well as performance fixes that have been promised based on their latest live stream, so stick around. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides from Microsoft Flight Simulator, or simply interested in supporting the channel, please consider joining us on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future releases that come down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below. All right, you guys, so let's go ahead and get into this. So this is pretty awesome information, depending on where you're coming from here. So first off, let's talk about some of the performance changes that are going to be happening. The biggest thing has to do with memory allocation. It has to do with both just sim performance in general, as well as the working title changes. You guys are going to see a bunch of screenshots and things like that. These are just slides from their live stream. This is more just my thoughts. Honestly, you guys, you could minimize this if you want. It's going to be more of a talking head without the head. Let's start talking about some of the things to expect. First off, if you are on a lower end performing machine, so maybe something like, for example, if you only have 16 gigs of RAM, you will likely notice a slight increase, but it also depends on a couple of other factors. I've seen a lot of videos where everyone's talking about how everyone's going to see, this massive performance change, frame rate increase, and I want to sort of lay that out a little bit differently because it's not necessarily true. It really depends on your frame rate restriction and where that restriction lies. For example, myself, I get very often limited by main thread. Limited by main thread means my CPU is not fast enough to produce the data fast enough for the graphics card to render. Okay, so for me, I'm not going to see any frame rate gain outside of where I'm at until I upgrade my CPU. If you are someone who is seeing this, as you're seeing here, coherent GT, that is used, for example, by working title. Working title found a workaround, but it's used for the glass screens, the glass cockpits. So your G1000s, G3000, G5000 suites. If you're seeing that, if that's where you're seeing the limitation on a coherent GT, that's where you're going to see an increase. Okay, with Sim Update 15, you're going to see a performance boost, and the performance boost is actually pretty significant. You guys can see here sort of how they've broken down. By the way, feel free to pause some of these because they're pretty awesome. So you can see where they've gone from launch to Sim Update 5 to Sim Update 15 and what's going to be changing. The big thing is in the next slide that's about to pop up is showing the difference between what working title have improved upon with the new memory allocation and the way things are being handled. So essentially what was happening before, if I understand everything correctly, was that basically the screens were refreshing every single second and the entire screen was being refreshed. Now it's going to be more of only the areas that need to be refreshed are going to be refreshed, which is changing the way that the memory is being allocated. Now remember, one of the things that I really enjoyed about the working titles presentation of this is they also specify that if you have other programs running in the background, Navigraph, OBS, Discord, Team Chat, whatever it may be, maybe you're watching a movie while you're flying, all of those things are going to be using up RAM. So I really like the fact that they included that because that was a big point to hit. Memory use is going to be a huge one, and memory demand is going to be a huge one. So again, if you're someone who's running on 16 gigs of RAM, you're probably going to notice a pretty significant increase in performance, assuming that we talked about before, that your CPU is not limiting things and that your GPU isn't a limiting factor. So here on the screenshot, if you guys look on the bottom, working our way down, you can see main thread. That's our CPU. If you go down further, you can see the coherent GT. That's your RAM. And then obviously down below is your GPU. Okay, so it really depends on where the hang up is that's going to determine whether or not you gain from this. And I just wanted to make sure everyone had a clear understanding. And by the way, if you guys don't know how to bring this up, you go to general options, go to developer mode or developers, turn on developer mode, then go to options go to debug and show frame rate counter or FPS counter, I believe is what it says. And this is how you get the screen that you're seeing here, and you guys can determine whether or not you're going to see a benefit from this. But again, there's a lot of factors that still come into play. So you still have to worry about CPU, GPU, and RAM. If you are impacted strictly by the RAM, you are going to see an increase in performance. Okay, but if you're impacted on CPU or GPU, that is still going to be a limiting factor. and you may not see a particularly large gain, if any. Now, as far as generalized simulation that we talked about in the beginning, getting away from the glass cockpits, with this new memory allocation that Asobo is also implementing, you may see anything from only like 1 to 2, maybe 4 or 5 frames gain, depending on the scenario. But what they have stated that you should see is a much smoother experience. So that is something that was actually quite comforting to hear as well. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about some of the performance gains and what to expect right out of the gate, because I've seen a lot of videos that are sort of overhyping the situation, and I want to make sure that everyone has a clear expectation of what you can personally expect from a Sim Update 15, and whether or not this was going to be a massive change for you, or if you should just look for maybe a slight performance increase, maybe some stabilization, you know. Again, I've watched multiple videos on this, and there's a lot of, it's going to be great, you're going to see great, it's going to be huge, and that may not be the case. Your hardware is going to be very dependent on whether or not these fixes improve your scenario, or if you don't see any change at all. For example, if you are currently not seeing the coherent GT thread being limited, if you're already getting up into the high FPS, if you're not seeing CPU and GPU limitations, you're probably not going to see much of an increase at all. So I wanted to toss that out there. For example, like I said, I don't see the memory issue. My computer is running 64 gigs of RAM, so I never come close to the RAM cap. Okay, so I wanted to toss that out there. Now, moving into a segment that I did think was really cool. This is going to be a new feature that's coming with Sim Update 15, and that is dual rotors. So, for example, the Chinook that we all know that is currently in development and maybe reaching the simulator sooner than later, hopefully, this is going to be a big deal for them. Dual rotor access, again, your Chinook, if you have a helicopter with counter rotating props, that will count. I can't remember what the one where the rotors are sort of at a 45-degree angle opposing of each other. If you have anything like that, that's going to be effective. The big thing for me when I saw this was more the Chinook. The Chinook is what immediately came to mind when I saw this. And what we're going to get is proper representation, or at least closer representation than what we would have seen before with the previous methodology of using a helicopter. We're going to see a big increase in the realism of that helicopter. So, again, I know there aren't too many twin blade helicopters out there, or twin rotor helicopters, but there are a few counter rotating helicopters that opens up the option for. There are, again, that counter rotating that I was talking about, where they're at the 245-degree angles. I can't remember what the name of that damn helicopter is. It's killing me. But I think for me, like I said, the one that really comes to mind is the Chinook. So that was really awesome to hear. Helicopter performance overall is also being looked at, everything from ground effect, transitional lift. These are things that are actively being worked on and being addressed, which was actually very, very comforting to hear, because I think helicopters are something that still have a long way to go inside of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And I really hope that this is something that is being really focused on, especially for the push into Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Helicopters are so much fun to fly, but they are very, very tricky, and they can be very, very unforgiving. And that's sort of what makes, especially in simulation for me, them so much fun. And there are often times where the helicopters are almost too easy. Now, one of the things that I really like that Asobo pointed out is even using the Cabri G2 that already exists inside the simulator, they've noticed significant improvements in transitional lift and rotational lift in regard to helicopter performance. So the experience that you should see when flying a helicopter should be significantly different than what we're experiencing now. And again, especially during those transition points, which is where a helicopter, if my understanding is correct, is the most vulnerable, if you will. That's when the most things can go wrong, is during those transitions. Which makes perfect sense to me. It's the same principles with like the Harrier, for example. The Harrier transitioning from vertical to forward momentum, from forward momentum into a vertical position, or vertical hold, if you will, is when it's at its most vulnerable point and when things can go really, really wrong. So this was really exciting to hear. They talked about it in quite amount of depth, which was a lot of fun. And there seems to be a lot of focus in improving the helicopter performance. So for us rotor heads, it was really, really good news to hear. And I thought that I would want to share that and sum that up with you guys as well. The next thing we wanted to talk about was the G3000 overview in regard to the changes that are coming to the G3000. We have wanted to see an improvement for the G3000 for quite a long time, as it is a full touchscreen environment. Now, the thing that I was really excited about, so first off, they're doing just like they did with the other systems. They're making it almost a one-to-one replica to the real unit. Everything from layout, customization options, touch features, you name it. And that was really exciting to me. The G3000 is probably my favorite of the avionics suite. I like both the G3000, G5000. The G1000 is the one where I wish that any aircraft that has the G1000, I prefer analog, or the GNS 530. I don't know why. Don't ask me. But with the G3000, G5000 suites, that's a different story. But one of the things that I really, really enjoy about this is that they've really taken, and they went into a lot of detail here. There's going to be quite a few slides, and the slides that you guys are about to see here aren't even all of them. So make sure that you guys, take a moment, pause, and read through this. But they're making basically a one-to-one replica. And if you are not using a third-party navigation source such as the GTNs, it can do the navigation on its own with its own flight planning with the VFR routing as well. Or IFR, not VFR, excuse me. But I really enjoyed, that it's compatible with all of the external IFR navigators. Again, TDS, GNS, you guys name it, it's there. But what I really like about it is, again, they made it more of a one-to-one comparison to the real unit. Now, why is this exciting for me as someone who makes tutorial guides? It means I can take a real G3000 guide or operating handbook and turn it into something that's more user-friendly for us in simulation. So I'm really super excited about being able to do something like that. But again, you guys can see that the layout is actually quite significantly different. You can see both the PFD and MFD images here that have a lot of similar information on it. The engine readout display is going to be really, really nice to have on the PFD and the MFD in a much more accurately laid out way. Now, this gets far further into detail. It's also going to have the temperature leaning system that we've seen before, as well as full customization and layout options to basically your liking. Now, a lot of the information that is here, or the display options that are here, are already existent inside the simulator, but it's going to be more, as far as an operational standpoint, more accurately representing the real aircraft, or the real avionics unit, which I thought was pretty slick as well. One of the things that I wish they had touched on that they did not, Asobo, at least if they did, I missed it. I watched the whole thing, maybe I missed right over it. But one of the things that I was really bummed out to hear is I didn't hear them talk anything more about a better touchscreen support, meaning our physical touchscreens, your touchscreens that you have sitting on your desk, your Kindles, your Android tablets, your iPads, whatever it may be. We still have to use something, at least I do, to get a real effective touchscreen support, is something like the pop-out panel manager, in order to really get any kind of decent touchscreen support. And I really was hoping that they would address that. I love that they are obviously updating the avionics suites to make them more realistic to the real counterparts. But then at the same token, with the price of touchscreens being what they are nowadays, and they've really come down a lot, they're far cheaper than what they used to be. It was really would have been something nice to see that they said, by the way, we're going to make our pop-out panels and Microsoft Flight Simulator by default much more touchscreen friendly. They didn't really mention anything about that. I was really hoping that was something that was going to be touched on, and unfortunately, unless I missed it, which I'm kind of hoping I did, that is something that we're still going to have to battle with. So these were the more exciting points that really came to me. Obviously, they talked about, general simulation and performance enhancements. They talked about they're still working on the photogrammetry. They talked about they're still working on data retrieval and streamlining that process. So the same fixes that we really see in any of the service updates, or sim updates, excuse me. But these were the really big ones that stood out to me as really exciting and a lot of fun to see. They went through a live Q&A, which I did think was pretty cool. But a lot of the same questions were being asked, and a lot of the questions that were asked in previous updates. Again, those constant, are we working on performance? Are we working on VR? Are we working on this? We do know that with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, VR is supposed to be fully supported, and more of an aim towards creating a smooth VR experience. So that was obviously kind of fun to hear. But again, that's the way that I'm interpreting the way they keep mentioning VR 2024. I'm not hearing a whole lot of, we're going to take all of these same fixes and push it into 2020 and make the 2020 VR experience significantly better. And I really hope that they do something similar to that, especially after hearing that, for example, OpenXR is no longer being supported by the developer to the public. It's going to be sort of one of those, if something's game breaking that affects the developer and he fixes it, yeah, he'll push out a new update. But OpenXR is sort of the meat and potatoes of what's making VR what it is for Microsoft Flight Simulator, as well as many others, obviously. But anyways, let's get into the final point here. Okay, and finally, guys, as you may be aware of, the Antonov AN225 from Microsoft Flight Simulator that can be purchased in the marketplace is a full donation purchase, meaning that all proceeds that are generated from the purchase of the AN225 goes to Antonov. As of February 26th, 2024, that will stop. Now, we don't have, I was actually sort of shocked to hear this. At the same token, I appreciate the honesty. They said that everything goes to Antonov in regard to the purchase of the AN225, but they have not been able to confirm whether or not Antonov is using those funds to rebuild the 225 or to, as he stated, quote unquote, maintain its memory. So like a memorial of it as a museum, I don't know. So that was a little... I don't know how to take that, but I mean, I suppose it's up to them, right? It's still a good cause. I still think it's awesome. It was still a needless attack and destroyed an absolute marvel in the aviation industry. It was the largest aircraft to ever fly that I'm aware of. So anyway, I wanted you guys to be aware that as of February 26th, all proceeds will no longer be going over to Antonov. So if you guys want to participate in that, it is a fun aircraft to fly, and definitely add something a little unique to the simulator that you won't get from any other aircraft that ever comes along with it, given the size of it and just the complexity of the aircraft. It's got some really cool models, some really cool features that come with it, such as the rotating nose and cargo bays and things like that. So it really is a fun plane to fly still. It's really like, you think like you're lifting, you know, a truck off the ground with your hands every time you pull back on the yoke. And it's funny because I say that with, you know, in simulation, I obviously can't feel it. And yet I flew it in VR. And it was different. It was different. And the really cool thing about, I'll tell you, in VR is that you get that sense of how high the cockpit was. You know, you were up there, man. I thought it was impressive in the 747. With the 225, it was pretty cool. So anyway, guys, I hope you guys found this video useful. I just wanted to touch over some of the key points that I found to be most valuable. I did feel that a lot of it was a lot of the same information that we hear with every single update. And so I tried to leave some of that, you know, stuff out. My biggest concern into this video was just simply that everybody was talking about, oh, you're going to see a massive improvement. Oh, the performance increase is going to be great. That's not true. It really depends on the scenario, and it's going to be very, very situation specific. Now, is it still a wonderful improvement? Absolutely. It is a great find. Anytime that memory allocation, memory use is refined, is always going to see some sort of benefit. And like I said, you may just be someone who, for example, maybe you don't gain any FPS, but you might see some stuttering reduction. Stuttering is absolutely can be caused through memory allocation and lack of available memory at the time. So anyways, as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe and healthy. I'll see you in the next one.